our next guest, who is a dear friend and a mentor and a teacher, this coming week, the Nobel Prize people will be announcing a Nobel Prize for economics. And our next guest, Dr. Arthur Laffer, should get that award. He should. He should have gotten it years ago. He did get a Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Trump. And Arthur is a longtime television commentator, and he has taught all of us so much with the Laffer curve and related supply-side free market economics. His newest book is The Trump Economic Miracle and the Plan to Unleash Prosperity Again, co-authored with our dear friend Stephen Moore. But Arthur, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I want to put it on the air, and a lot of people listen to this show. You should win the Nobel Prize. You deserve the Nobel Prize. And if you don't get it, because I'm not sure your name was submitted, maybe you can get it. But if you don't get it, A, there's always next year, but B, you get an honorary one. You've earned it.
Well, thank you, Larry. That's lovely of you to say. You're a friend's friend, and you and Steve and I've had fun together for a lot of years, changing policy and changing the direction of the country. It's just been lovely.
Yes, it has. And we got more work to do.
Yes, we do.
Let me ask you, Art, on tax policy with Mr. Trump. It's interesting. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal are opposing him. I mean, they favor the original Trump tax cuts, the business tax cuts, cutting the corporate rate, 100% depreciation, and modest marginal rate reductions for individuals. But Trump has put out now, 4 or 5. Let's see if we can figure it. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Seniors shouldn't pay taxes on their benefits. And then recently, let's see, he's put out one
on the deductions of state and local taxes.
That's right. He's loosening up the SALT tax deduction. This past week, he's given a deduction to the interest rate you pay on your automobile loans, and he's also an old one. No double taxation if you're an American citizen working abroad. No double taxation. Now, I'm interested in what you have to say, and I want to just put in one more thing. I talked about this on the TV show yesterday with Steve Forbes and Kevin Hassett. And Steve, who was another star, brilliant star, he said that these tax cuts put Trump on the way to a flat tax. And we didn't have time in the show to really explore that. So I wanted to ask you, does that make sense? What do you think Steve was saying? And what do you think of the tax cuts in general?
Well, let me just say I think Steve is correct, although that's not the way I would point out the benefits of these. Number one, you never want to collect taxes where the cost of collecting the taxes is greater than the amount of taxes. That makes no sense whatsoever. Thus, I support 100% his tax-free on tips. I mean, that is, as long as we're talking tips, not $100 million tips, as long as we're talking tips in the businesses we're talking about, that is a classic case of don't waste your time and effort trying to collect taxes where the cost is greater than the amount of tax. The second one is very, very makes common sense as well. Great principles in economics is you don't want to tax overtime. You want to make the marginal tax rate as low as possible because that's where the incentives are to increase output, employment, and production. So when you take it and lower the tippy tip of the earnings with no tax, you really are creating a very strong incentive to produce without losing much revenues at all, if any revenues. Okay, that's also very, very important there. When you look at the SALT deductions, I've always supported viscerally because I come from a state that doesn't allow them. We don't have an income tax. We're a very low tax state, and it's unfair to Tennessee to give deductions to New Yorkers. We're paying part of the New York State income tax. But the real point here, again, is that those people who are high earners in New York that would normally use those deductions will be incentivized incredibly by weakening and loosening those deductions. So it's, again, another very pro-growth tax in the system. I mean, I like it very, very much. I really love the Making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. I think that makes a sense. And what was there was one in Social Security that I don't really understand, but the other ones make all the sense in the world as well. I mean, why would you double tax people abroad who are competing with foreigners? Let's say you got an American in Hong Kong competing with someone from Germany in Hong Kong. Germany does not double tax the guy. The American is double taxed. The American is put as a distinct disadvantage in competition with the guy from Germany. It makes no sense to do that either, Larry. It's the exact same thing we talked about bringing capital home and paying a domestic tax much lower and just bringing it home. So I support those 100%. I think it shows genius, by the way, his insight.
Wouldn't tax-free overtime fit the bill? That's a lower marginal tax rate on labor.
Yeah, no, that's why I said overtime. Getting rid of the tax on overtime is a marginal tax cut that is perfect. You don't lose revenues because these guys wouldn't work overtime if they were just double taxed. They're heavily taxed. But if you make it over, they'll work a lot of overtime. That'll increase output employment. It'll increase sales taxes. It'll increase payroll taxes. It'll increase all these other taxes in the system. These guys will then work a lot harder, create a lot more output, employment, production. It is the perfect tax. You shouldn't have tax on overtime. You want the marginal tax rate to be as low as possible compared to the average tax rate. So it's just terrific. And it shows how Trump thinks, Larry. He thinks like an economist, for God's sake. It's really good.
No, he thinks like a Laffer curve supply-side economist.
Yeah, well, I don't mean like a professional economist. I mean like someone who really knows economics, not someone at Harvard.
How about the deduction of the interest for car loans?
Oh yeah, it makes sense. Let me do that with you for a second. It's a real interesting way of looking at it. Imagine you borrow $100,000 at 10%. And let's imagine you lend $100,000 at 10%. It's a perfect wash. Should you be liable for taxation? No, you should not be liable for taxation. What that means is that either your interest income should not be taxed, or if your interest income is taxed, your interest expense should be deducted.
Of course.
Now, let's do the second example. Let's imagine I borrow $100,000 at 10%, and I lend $100,000 at 20%. Should I be liable for taxes? Of course I should. I'm a savings and loan. I'm a bank. I'm a financial intermediary. What you've just told me with those two examples is all interest income should be taxable and all interest expense should be deductible, including car loans, including home loans, including all the loans. Now, the only one we have difficulty on are bad debts. Bad debts there because there the interest rate is very high because of the risk, and it's not really just an interest rate. But yes, he's right on car loans.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I just want to say, if you think about it too, almost all these things are aimed at what I call working folks, basically middle income, maybe a bit lower middle income. They're the ones who can benefit the most from this stuff. I mean, this is so Trumpian because that's
so growthian.
And growthy.
You call it growthy.
Growthier.
I've never heard that word before, but growthier.
Yeah.
It is exactly growthier, and that's what we want. And this president is a Larry Kudlow follower on being growthier. He's great.
When I interviewed him last Friday, we went down to Florida. We talked a little bit about growthier, but he's there, and it's just fascinating. And he's creating this working class coalition, and you're just looking at, the potential here. If you clear away the regulations. And you stabilize the value of the dollar, which he is in favor of. I mean, you can get 4% growth. You can get 5% growth.
Exactly. So you could. Now, can I ask you a serious question? How many of those policies did you suggest to him? Have you talked about to him originally?
No, only the only one we talked about the Social Security benefits, and after he raised the tips, I raised overtime. Okay, I felt like those two went together.
It's amazing how susceptible he is to good logic.
Well,
I mean, he really is a very, very competent president. And, I'm always impressed by the ideas he comes up with and how quickly he sees good ideas from other people. He's really amazing on that, Larry.
Well, he claims, when I visited with him in Washington a while back, he claims that it was a Las Vegas waitress who talked about not taxing tips. He picked up on it right away. He didn't talk to me, didn't talk to any of the economic advisors. He said it was a waitress. But he said it clicked, so we went with it. And then he looked at me and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Sheer genius."
It is sheer genius. It is sheer
I'll price it out. I got to go, Art.
Okay, talk to you later, Larry.
No,
Thank
you're
you very much
terrific.
for me. And just remember, you're the friend's friend.
Oh, no,
I love you dearly.
You're the best. That's Dr. Arthur Laffer, folks.